Right. This is Lori Niles with Violinist.com, and we are here today with violinist Hilary Hahn and roboticist and AI specialist Carol Riley. Um, and we're here to talk about a special project they're doing that has to do with AI, connecting AI with composing music. And so I guess I would like to start out by throwing it out to maybe both of you. How did this project even come about? What does AI have to do with composing?
Carol, you want to kick it off?
Sure, happy to. Yeah, so we wanted to. Hilary and I have co-founded DeepMusic.ai, and we're bringing together these two different worlds of artificial intelligence and creativity, and really advocating for the professional artist. AI's had huge breakthroughs in the past decade. Doing things like driving cars and trading stocks. And the realm of creativity is one that's extremely sensitive because it's really the heart of humanity, and artists themselves are one group of like the most creative people on earth, in my opinion. And it's because it's so subjective, it's more about the process and intent, that it makes it challenging for artificial intelligence to break in and do things that humans generally do, that is so emotional or to the core of who we are as human beings. And so that was definitely one area I wanted to explore, because we started seeing artificial intelligence do things that are almost human-like. So they can create things that look like art or in the style of an artist. And I started realizing that there was a disconnect between, true musicians and their creative process, and how do we use technology to help enhance their current process and enable them to be even like possibly more creative or create novel types of art. And so I approached Hilary to chat with her. We had known each other back when I was in grad school. We were both in Baltimore and had known each other through mutual friends, and I pinged her. And we ended up having a 2-hour conversation while she was sitting out in the rain, and it was really interesting. So it kind of spawned and led to the creation of DeepMusic.ai.
Well, Hilary, what caught your imagination about this whole project?
Well, I think that there are ways that art interacts with innovation, and as artists and as musicians, we're always asking questions of direction and intent. Like, we're trying to communicate the music to the audience, and we're trying to make sure that it's a genuine expression. And we're also thinking, if you speak with composers, it's very clear, like composers are always thinking, what is my identity, and how can I make something that is very unique? And there's also a question of, if everything has already been done, what new can be done? And so you see waves of composers trying that in different directions. And now there are a lot of different directions people are going in. Someone like David Del Tredici ran into a lot of resistance when he was writing tonal music, because that wasn't considered innovative, or it wasn't considered edgy enough at the time that he was writing that. Now there is a lot of room for contemporary tonal music, and vice versa. You have composers who are creating entirely new sound worlds, composers who are creating electronic music, and performers who are doing things that they never learned in conservatory, because that's what the composer wrote into the music. So there's this big expansion of ideas and creativity. And when I was working on my Encores project, I thought I knew like the types of composers there were in the world. I just thought, there's going to be this style of composer and this style of composer, and they probably all sit in a studio somewhere and they write a little bit differently, or they play, or they write from their mind. So like those were kind of the parameters I had. And when I spoke to them about their intentions in the music, every person had something. Oh, sorry. I'm getting some dings, but let me know if you hear them. Every person had something really different about how they were writing. Some people were very specific about what they wanted to what they wanted to convey in the music, and other people were writing a framework for the performer to interpret. And some people would write, like, one composer I work with has a nocturnal schedule. Like, she just gets up at 6 p.m. and works all night and then sleeps during the day. And that's when she's creative. So that's what she does. And another composer, like, writes before the kids get up and then, you know, like, grabs a moment during lunchtime and then they teach the rest of the day. It's like, there are so many lifestyles and so many different people. So if you expand it outwards a little bit, you see that creativity is very human. But speaking with Carol about the state of AI composition and seeing that there are sort of communication gaps and understanding gaps between the fields of professional art of different genres and AI. I consider it art. I think coding is art. I think designing is art. You know, so AI design, AI architecture, AI programming, AI construction, AI worlds. You know, I think all of that is compatible, but yet there may not be conversations happening at the rate they could be happening between the fields, so that professional musicians might wind up with tools that they can work with. Professional creatives might wind up with tools that can help them kind of get through the tedious aspects and maybe jumpstart certain other aspects of their creativity, or give them space in their day to have more time to put into the creativity. And then AI, I was just so intrigued to learn that AI is at a point where the projects that are in development will be the basis for a lot of AI projects in the future. So the field is forming, but we have a small window right now to be part of the conversation. And I think artists have a lot to offer this conversation. And I think also AI scientists are very artistic people. And it's interesting for artists to speak with them and figure out, like, where's the common ground and where's the innovation. It's inspiring to have conversations across genres and conversations across fields.
Well, I'm kind of curious about sort of the specifics of how artificial intelligence would help in the composing process. And also just, you know, is there a difference between sort of classical composers and then people like my son making tunes in his bedroom, you know, like with like Ableton Live or something? Like, it seems like there's already a great deal of artificial intelligence built into some of the programs that pop musicians are using. What's the difference for classical musicians and for this project that you guys have just done? What are kind of the specifics?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I think over the last few years when this project started seeding in my mind, you know, I really wanted to figure out, okay, you know, what are the companies out there? You know, what does exist? Because you hear about it, and AI is so broad that, you know, even if they use like very little AI or one algorithm, they would call themselves an AI company. So I really wanted to do like an assessment of and compare and contrast, and that doesn't exist right now. And what we found as we created this creativity database for the music composition space, you know, right now it's still early. There's roughly around 10 startups in this space that are actively building products that have launched. And then you add on top of that probably another dozen research labs and university research labs that are starting to build products out. So, you know, while we're early, I just want to highlight how fast the space of artificial intelligence moves. It's different than anything we've seen before. And it's so ground shifting as well. It's a huge paradigm shift. We use the analogy that AI is the next electricity, where you don't even know how it pervades through every facet of a technology or your life. And just to give you an example, for the space of self-driving cars, I had founded a company 5 years ago where, you know, this was the very start, where it wasn't part of the conversation. This is with the guys from the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Lab. And it was, you know, Waymo was just starting out by doing like their testing. And no one thought this was a real space. And in the span of 5 years, we've seen, cars being tested out in California and Texas and Florida, and they're driving around, to last week's IPO and billions of dollars being funded in this space. So that's a span of 5 years of how it did this complete 180. And I see the same thing probably happening with creativity. And as Hilary mentioned, we have to start at the ground phases, because these startups, technology that can impact millions of people, are founded or built by possibly a team of like as small as 5 to 10 people. So very small amount of people can build something that can impact the future of a whole industry. And so that was why I thought it was so important to get professional artists and their voice and their creativity and their process early on, while these startups are still forming, and these huge decisions that impact not only the artist, but also the future of business, and like copyright laws and ethics are all going to be impacted. And we need to make sure that these companies have a strong moral compass, and there's some way to feed back the information so it's not just a monetary value, because what we will see are startups that might just undercut an artist and replace them, as opposed to have companies that actually supplement artists and build tools for them that can help them do the tedious things. So at DeepMusic, what we're really interested in is working with artists to figure out, what are the pain points? What do they spend large amounts of time doing that they can, maybe technology can help automate? AI is fantastic for sifting through large databases, finding patterns, suggesting things. So like Hilary had given examples of different artists and styles that they work, of how they work. So how great would it be to have like a 24/7 collaborator, or you can collaborate with someone from the past, or someone like a previous version of yourself, so like it would be great to have, or you can even have like an improv jam session with someone, so you don't have to call up a friend in the middle of the night. So I think these are things that AI could potentially do. And really three areas I think we've found that, if I was to break it down, of how music can help composers. One is just like functional music assistance. So like IDing things, auto production, drum beat creation. So those type of functional, tedious tasks. The second one is just the inspirational. We found like one of our composers used the analogy that composing with AI is kind of like working with an experienced, very enthusiastic composer, where they were like they were trying to write a solo piece, but the AI was spitting back out things that was impossible for one instrument to do, because it doesn't know the human limitations, right? It doesn't know that we only have 10 fingers or 2 hands. So it was just generating things that sounded like an instrument, but wasn't necessarily how a human would create. So, you can use AI for inspiration, I think would be the second bucket, just patterns that your brain doesn't naturally go to, or that we're trained to think in. So it gives you a different style, and might push you to the limits. And I think the third area is personalization. So, creating a piece of music that can be personalized to a certain experience, or like a certain listener could actually like change things to personalize to their taste. So I would say that those are probably like the 3 buckets.
Well, and I'm wondering how the composers actually used it in this case. Maybe Hilary, you can talk about the violin composition. How did the artificial intelligence, how did it help them? And, did the composer share with you, what was different about this process and this piece that was, attributable to the artificial intelligence?
Yeah, I worked with David Lang. He has written for me before Light Moving was on the Encores project. And I know him as a composer, I know him as a person, and he's very much of a piece. Like the way he lives his life and writes his music, and he's one of the founders of Bang on a Can, the huge umbrella organization in New York for this festival. I just think that that's such an influential organization, and it's surprising how much has gone through, like how much has happened under their watch, and how much they've helped draw all of contemporary music together. He was the person when I did the Encores project who he really surprised me because I knew that he was involved with the entire contemporary music landscape, of course, as a composer, but also through Bang on a Can. But I had been concerned because I was working with 27 different composers, and I just wasn't sure how people would feel about each other. And he surprised me by just being sort of the best version of a diplomat and ambassador and supporter of fellow artists that you could ever imagine. And I expected that he would be a great person and a great composer and a great guy, but like really hearing him say, no, I think, you know, there's room for all of these styles and we should just support each other, was fantastic. So of course I thought of him for this project because of his influence and his reach and his knowledge and his open-mindedness and his sort of holistic understanding and participation in the contemporary music world. But I also love how he conceptualizes his works. A lot of his pieces have a story behind them. So Light Moving, the title is related to a moving company actually in New York City. And you know, everything that he writes in his emails, it's like he never writes a capital letter. I've never seen David Leong write a capital letter in my life. So, you know, it's like he's a minimalist composer who never uses capital letters. He writes very, you know, minimal emails, except when he needs to explain something, then it's very clear. So like, this would just be fascinating to hear him talk about this experience, to see how he interacts with this experience. So what he wound up doing is, Carol, you can speak about, I would love for you to add your part of this story. So he was working with a program where he was having a little, like a bit of a challenge figuring out how to make the music that he was getting really fit into how he composes. And he really thought about it a lot. And if you read his artist statement, you can see the conceptualizing and the thought process and the, if I do this, then that could be this, and this could mean this, and this could mean that. So what he wound up doing is he started out with a sort of shifting meter. So it's for solo violin. So he started out with like a shifting meter, rhythmic, sort of minimalist, like repetitive thing, but it's just off kilter enough. Like he likes to throw off the players. He likes to write things that are pretty much, they kind of lull you into thinking you know what's next, then you get tangled. So he likes that sort of unpredictability into him. That's a sign that his music is not falling into patterns. So he wrote a section that was his, so dum, bum, 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 bum. So all down bows. I just do them all down bows. And then he alternated his notes and the AI notes. He wanted it to be clear who had written what. So he had a melody from AI and he inserted those notes between, but there's a very complicated thought process that went into all of that. And at the end, it winds up with just the AI notes. So the way I conceptualized my technique in it is, okay, so David starts out with these sort of chopped double stops, you know, like these big impact notes with there are rests in between every one of his notes. So I'll just do all of his notes down bow, and then I'll do all of the AI notes up bow. And so then at the end, like you can see, like this is David and this is the AI. And at the end, I just do a bunch of up bows, which is the AI finishing its melody. And so that was really a unique David way of writing, of co-writing a piece. And he has worked with, I believe, AI generated lyrics or crowdsourced lyrics in the past. So he's familiar with the conceptualizing of combining input. But Carol, I would love you to like either correct what I got wrong or and definitely fill in your part of the story.
Yeah, no, I think everything you said was correct. Yeah, David did a really interesting approach in the sense that he really seeded it by leaving a space so that it was alternating between human and then AI, human and then AI. And the way that we generated those AI clips was that he had we'd chosen the program OpenAI's MuseNet, which is an open source program. And we actually picked a clip that he had written, seeded the music, and then picked different influences. So basically, it would start off with David's piece, and then it would continue on in the style of. And then we had picked. I generated 20 samples that he would pick from. So it was from like Lady Gaga to like Bach to Mozart. So there was 20 pieces, and it generates. Every time it generates, it's different, right? So it will be a different pattern every time, even if I pick the same parameters. But we saved those 20 clips and gave it back to him and his team, and they actually surprisingly chose the Journey influence clip, that 1980s pop band, and that was the clip that he had selected that had picked up, various patterns, and that's what you see Hilary playing. So it's David / co-written with David plus Journey styled music is the final piece.
I mean, don't stop believing, right? No.
Yeah. And what I think another interesting thing to note was like when it came back for Hilary to play, like there was actually certain notes that were very challenging that David had to go back and he tried to change as minimal notes as possible, but I do believe there were a few notes he had to change just because it was impossible. Is that correct, Hilary, that you there was one revision cycle?
Yeah, he probably did some revisions before I got it. I think that he probably kind of like made it all coherent as far as the conversation between his notes and AI. It wasn't impossible to play, and I think that there may have been a couple notes that we altered a little bit, but for the most, I think it was like it was an agility issue. It was like I could maybe get there, but was it necessary to actually do all of that? But for me, the piece was pretty formed. And the thing that really sticks in my mind about the process that he described is at some point, so he wrote a lot of double stops, and at some point the AI started adding double stops to what it was writing. So in the course of it, it kind of trained itself and picked up a little bit more of what he was doing. It feels almost like it got more courageous. Like it was like, okay, I'll write single notes for a while, but look, he did double stops. Maybe I can do double stops too. And then it starts, speaking up like, I got double stops in my repertoire. Listen to me.
It really sounds like a conversation.
I love that aspect. Yeah, I love that. Also in another piece, one of the other composers, he said, like, there was an arpeggio that the AI just really wanted to do. It just kept doing it, and he's never written it. And all the stuff that the AI was working off of, he's never written an arpeggio like that or that arpeggio. And it wasn't in the stuff that he gave it, but it kept showing up this arpeggio for the performer to play. And he's like, I guess it wants, in its own way, it wants to write that arpeggio. So we're going to let it write that arpeggio.
I mean, it's just kind of a fascinating thing. It's just like having a partner in composing, it sounds like. And it sounds like it almost took on like seemingly human, I guess that's the intelligence part of the artificial intelligence, right? It just takes on like human characters. It's like, well, okay, I guess if you really want this, we'll try it, if you insist. Like it actually is insisting, kind of.
I think as humans, we want to see human characters in things. And so as artists, we're always drawing lines and interpreting things. So it's really interesting also as an artist to learn about AI and learn what's reality, what's conjecture, what is creativity. And you think, oh, AI can't experience these human things, but what does it actually mean to experience these things? What is art? What are these things that we assume we have definitions for, and where is that human line? It's kind of questionable because a lot of things that humans use now are tools. People still have their humanity, but they're using tools to help them get through the day, and the tools may be inside their phones, like GPS and autocomplete and autocorrect. How often do we use autocorrect? And I wouldn't say, I don't have enough knowledge to be like, this AI is this and this AI is that, but I just think about all of the things that I do now that I didn't do 20 years ago. And I think we're going to see that happen in creativity as well. So I think it's really fascinating to debate these questions with people who are considering them every day. Artists consider these questions every day. Performers consider them every day. You know, we consider what's art's role in society. You know, what do we want to say with this piece? What was this composer doing? We go back to history. We imagine what it might have felt like to be that person. And then in AI science, there's a lot of talk about what is human, like what's human, what's humanity, what is art. These debates and existential questions actually really could overlap in fascinating ways that both fields gain from a conversation about these things.
Yeah, I know that when I'm writing an email and it fills in the rest of it, you know, I'm really, even if that was exactly what I wanted to say, I'm a little bit like, is it okay to just use that, you know?
I get this, sounds great, yes, thank you, suggestions a lot, and I'm like, yeah. I kind of agree with those, so yeah. Sounds great, tap.
Well, I wanted to sort of maybe conclude by talking about this specific, like this performance that's coming up and what exactly is it, and you know, how people can tune in and see the result of this work that you guys have done.
Yeah, so on Tuesday, December 15th at 5 p.m. Pacific time, 8 p.m. Eastern time, we're going to be having the world premiere of 3 of these pieces, and then a 30-minute discussion with the composers themselves about their experience, because I would say that, you know, every composer had a different approach to working with AI software, and each AI software in turn is also different, right? Because like you were mentioning, I think AI is not just one algorithm that everyone is using. I mean, every company has to feed it data, and so each algorithm is trained on different things. So just like a human, they have their own experiences, and it's these experiences that make up what they believe, you know, and that's probably why there was that arpeggio for that that kept on coming back, because it was trained on so much of that in its repertoire. So it'll be interesting to hear that conversation of how the composers interacted and what they did with that feedback when it came back, and how they incorporate it in their process. So we have 3 pieces premiering. The first is going to be by David Leong and performed by Hilary Hahn. It's called Out of Body. The second is composed by Michael Abels on the piano, by Dominic Chidi. How do you pronounce his last name?
Dominic
Cayley. And that piece is called Gift of the Machines. And the third piece is an orchestral piece by Dana Leong, and it is called I, Dragon.
And the orchestral piece, just for those of you wondering about this pandemic situation, is one person doing all the parts, is that right?
Yeah. So, you know, the other 2 pieces are solo pieces, because we didn't want to have an ensemble recording during this pandemic.
Sure.
But Dana, since he was the composer and also the performer, he has hopped onto multiple different instruments and self-recorded, like the trumpet and the cello, and probably some other instruments as well. So it'll be interesting to see his piece, him performing with himself and with AI.
Yeah. So everybody, check it out. And thank you so much to Hilary Hahn, to Carol Riley for sharing your project with us.
Thank you for talking with us.
Thank you.